terms of timing, we've got another half hour, so we've got plenty of time for questions and discussion. So any comments from you, Ron, before we open it up?
No, thank you, Kurt. It's
Yep.
I guess I just should say it's a little bit intimidating when you go through this for the first time. I have worked through as part of the process, the development process, and it's once you've been through the process once and checked all the information boxes, and it's an incredibly powerful tool and very useful, and not at all intimidating on the second, third, and fifth time through. So it will be a little intimidating because there is an incredible amount of information there, but the default values are all very sound, and but the second or third time through, when you're doing a new design, you might want to change some of them, the default values. But I would just recommend proceeding through the example the first time, just accepting the default values, and then you'll get a feel for what the results are, and you might then want to go back and make some changes to the default values. But
Yeah.
I think it's a very powerful tool and something that should really help us in the rating process.
Okay. Yeah. And then in terms of, getting used to it and things, we're going to create YouTube videos of the talk today, and put those up and make those available. And then also there's, the training modules here in terms of if you have specific questions, for example, about, the seismic hazard step or the building capacities or building components, there's specific items, in addition to sort of an overall introduction as well. Okay, so I'm going to stop talking. We have a half hour for questions. If we'd like, we can go through and sort of step through the process here, and ask for questions on each individual step. But before we do that, I just want to open it up in general for questions.
Yes, Kurt. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Dick Fryer. So I've noticed that. Pretty good, thanks. I've noticed that this is pretty well set up for buildings which are generally associated for new types of construction, modern construction. When will we be able to do things that are a little older, like concrete encased steel, mold frame, wood frame buildings? The kinds of things that people are going to come to us and like, well, how does it rate? And we're going to say, not well. And here it is, but here's what we can do when we retrofit it.
Yeah, so I guess the answer to that depends on, which specific thing you're trying to do. So I think our near-term goal is to expand the simplified method to work for taller, but also for weak story, right, and soft story. So that'll help, the simplified method be more applicable there. For those types of buildings, you can do response history now, but I mean, that's a lot of work. So our first priority is to make the simplified method more broadly applicable, particularly taller, weak, and soft story. Then probably like late winter, early spring, we're planning to work on the wood light frame and tilde. In terms of steel encased concrete columns and so on, we don't have that specifically on our development list in terms of that specific system. But in terms of wood light frame and tilt up, those are our next two priorities that we're working on after we update the simplified method. And I think this kind of feedback in terms of priorities are exactly what we're looking for in terms of prioritizing our work, because our current phase of work with the National Science Foundation, we have $150,000 to spend on development, and it looks likely that we'll get another round next year too. So we want to make sure we spend those resources and time wisely, in order to best support kind of the profession and where we need to go. So those are the current priorities in terms of simplified method, then wood light frame and tilt up. We also are looking at actually precast systems. Someone has approached us and looks like they probably want to support creating fragilities and things for precast potentially. So we're looking at that as well. But any feedback on if those priorities should be different or would be well received.
It's nice that matched. I mean, I work in San Francisco, and you take a look at the building stock of downtown. I mean, there's everything from soup to nuts there. But these are the kinds of things that we're going to have to be dealing with. So because the sooner we can deal with them, the better.
Yeah, and it depends on what the application is. If it's so once the simplified method is in place to take care of weak story, soft story, that handles sort of more of the behavioral aspects. In terms of the specific component fragilities and things, one option is to select the component fragility that's most similar to the one that you have in terms of what you think the damage and repair cost and consequences would be, to give you an estimate of where you're at. But it really just depends on the application as to whether that's a good estimate or not.
Okay. Thanks.
So in terms of where do we find the example problem was a question. There's no set example problem. Just find a project that you've done, preferably one that you've done a 3141 on so that you can make comparisons. But just find a project that you've done or a project that you're thinking about doing or whatever, and just do a case study. So there's no specific requirements for that. And then question from Andy Ewing. Don't have a mic. How to address Frankenstein's buildings with multiple lateral systems in parallel with each other. You can go through and put in the different building components. So you have walls and walls and frames or brace frames and something else or whatever. You can go in and put those different quantities of building components in there, right? And then you would have to modify the mode shape, right? So if you have a dual system, your mode shape would be different. If you have some sort of mixed system, you would have to make a judgment call on, you have a frame mode shape and a wall mode shape, or a brace frame mode shape and a moment frame mode shape, what your aggregate mode shape would be. Of course, if you do a model, you can take the mode shape from the model. But it would really be, modifying the period, modifying the mode shape, potentially modifying the strength. And those would be kind of your engineering judgment inputs. And then on the component side, you would just have to go in and swap out the structural components, and put in your Frankenstein structural components in terms of what's in your building. So
I think it's important for the more complicated systems, Kurt, that people, the simplified method's going to have its limitations.
Yep.
And when we get in the more complicated framing systems, I think we're going to have to seek to get mode shapes from an analysis, because there's only so far you can go with a simplified method. And that input capability will be there in the next week or two, you said?
Yeah, so what you can do right now is, if you have your mode shape, right, you can modify your mode shape right here from the default. So, if you have a model, you can modify the mode shape and then run the simplified method with the modified mode shape. The next level would be to do a response spectrum. So what we're going to do is basically all of these inputs here for story drifts and accelerations, we're going to make these tables be inputs. So you can put in your mean responses from response spectrum analysis or whatever method you use, presumably RSA. And then we'll use those in place of the simplified method mean responses. And we're looking at a week or two out, something like that on that functionality. We're hoping by next week, but we'll see how quickly the development goes.
This is James. If you did the RSA, would that not still be considered a simplified approach, but just enhanced?
Yeah, I would characterize it as sort of enhanced, simplified. So if you do the RSA, what you would do is you would you would override the story drifts and accelerations, right? And then we would calculate the residuals using the typical simplified method approach. And then also the typical simplified method approach has default variability values in terms of variabilities in story drift and variabilities in acceleration. So those still would be used, but you would be overriding the mean response values. So I would call it enhanced simplified method, but frankly, it's quite enhanced on the simplified method. Really, the only thing you're assuming is variability. So, I mean, I would expect that putting in RSA results like that would be a very good representation of what your response behavior and outcomes would be.
But at this point in time, it would still not relieve us of the limitations of the simplified method within USRC rules.
Well, so let me drill down and make sure I understand your question. So the current limitations of the simplified method are 15-story, ductility of 4, regular building, that kind of thing. I mean, if you do RSA, you could do above 15 stories, so you would remove that limitation. Since it's elastic, you still have the limitation that, you're not representing the, localization if you're going to really high levels of demand. You would still have that limitation. But I mean, you would remove the height limitation. You also, frankly, would remove some of the simplification of just how the curve fitting was done in the simplified method. You would also remove having to use a default mode shape, right, which gives you a lot better, estimate of your building specific performance rather than a default mode shape building performance. So yeah, I mean, there's still some limitations because you're doing an elastic analysis primarily. But I think it gets past most of the limitations beyond the elastic analysis limitation, or with the exception of the elastic analysis limitation. And then I think a second part maybe of an answer to that question is the USRC requirements, specifically say, I forget the language, any rational method for predicting structural response. So if you use some modified form of the P58 simplified method, that's an enhancement on that, all the better. That's allowed in the USRC approach and process. Does that answer your question on that?
Yeah, that's helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay.
Hey, Kurt, this is Reed Zimmerman, KPFF.
Hey, Reed.
Question about the class fragilities. You had mentioned that basically the USRC rules prescribe that you must use the EMO 154 default class fragilities. So that means that if I want to go and compute this myself, is I think that EMO 154 class fragility is not representative for the specific building I'm looking at. I cannot do that.
I mean, I think that maybe I'll turn this question over to Ron, but I mean, the guideline is to use the 154 fragility, or the checklist to get the fragility. The reason for that is because the fatality and injury rates that are used for the thresholds, right, have been basically made consistent with FEMA 154 checklist results. Now, if you see something that the checklist doesn't handle, right, that, your building should be, worst collapse capacity or better collapse capacity, I mean, there's always room for engineering judgment in this. It would just have to be, you'd have to, override the number and give an explanation for the person reviewing it why you did that. That would be my answer, but I mean, I don't want to speak beyond my pay grade, so maybe I should kick that one to Ron and see if Ron has a response to that.
Not really. Yeah. Kurt, you might be able to answer this. I thought you could override or input your own collapse capacity or probability of collapse override the calculated checklist information. But what would happen, Reed, if you did that, in terms of the reviewer, you would need to justify that in your submittal. But I believe that capability exists, does it not, Kurt?
It does, but we would have to modify things a little bit. So how we have it right now is, so I guess it's a two-tiered question, right? One question is what's allowed in the USRC process. The other question is how does the software work, right? Kind of two separate questions.
Yes.
If we want to allow that, how we have it set up right now is if you're doing a USRC analysis, you're forced into the checklist, right? So this user-defined collapse, user-defined probability aren't allowed. We could easily modify that and allow you to do that, but then maybe have a pop-up that says, hey, you need to use the checklist when you do a USRC analysis. Reminder, you need to do this, but have the flexibility where if the engineer thinks that, 2% should be 1%, they could use the user input, right? Yeah. And then the reviewer would just see that they modified that when they do their review. They would see that they overrode that quote, default approach or whatever. So, I guess on wearing my software hat side, I'll do whatever we'd like to do on the software side to support what the USRC process would want for this.
Yeah, I think, Reed, this was probably the area where we had the most sort of technical difficulty as to what the appropriate thing to do is. And anyway, we did decide to go down the 154 checklist so we could get some uniformity, and that was the best piece of technical information we had. I think we could revisit the issue if we needed to. And, we've got our technical advisory committee is set up to address issues like this. But I wouldn't want to change that at this point.
I understand. I think, consistency is very important, and you wouldn't want someone going in and placing a class fragility function that they just sort of made up. But I'm thinking if there are ways to calculate it, if you're already doing nonlinear response history analysis, that would be sort of a small extension maybe of what you were doing already to get a lot of the building response. And it seems like if you have that greater information and can take advantage of it or use it just to get more close to the truth, that you should be allowed to.
Yeah, so this, in the implementation manual, Reed, the language we have in there right now say that the following modifications and interpretations of the 154 checklist are allowable. If these are utilized, they should be well documented, subject to review. Basically, if you have, sort of a retrofit between no retrofit and comprehensive, you can do this. If the retrofit meets 75%, you can do this. If you can show that a checklist item does not result in a reduction of the performance, you can override that checklist item and not use it. And then building properties not included in the checklist, engineering judgment can be provided, for modifications to the resulting collapse fragility. So actually, we handle that right there. And then if this is done, it'll be subject to elevated technical review if you do this, is how it's worded right now.
Okay, sounds like I think that answers my question. I might just say, Kurt, that within the software, I would sort of more be in favor of allowing that last option. But with the warning that you proposed.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, we'll go ahead and do that. And then, that gives the flexibility really that language that we just looked at reflects. And then we'll just put a very clear pop-up, hey, make sure you're doing this intentionally.
And we didn't think too many people would do that option, Reed. But I think that if you've gone to the trouble of evaluating that, you should be able to use it. So we'll change that so that option is available.
I agree with that completely, Ron. I don't think many people will.
software, though, because then the software could also do a better job of flagging it for the elevated review.
Correct.
See, once it's part of the software process and procedure.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah, and we're trying to make the review process as efficient as possible. So just so everyone is aware that if you change a default, the reviewer will see that a default has been changed, and you need to, if you go in and change your fragility functions, as an example, to bring the damage down, that will get flagged in the review process. And so you'll need justification. It's not that you can't do any of that, but you will need to be able to justify why you've done it. And, who knows how the review process is going to play out, but we need to be as efficient as we possibly can and allow the user to do the most appropriate thing for the project. So we'll just have to see how this all comes together.
Yeah. So we're setting it up so, like, if you have a default strength of 7%, and you change it to 50%, then when the reviewer looks at what we're calling the review mode model, right, which you'll provide a link to when you submit your USRC rating, if you use SP3 at least, then this will be orange or yellow rather, this box, and then next to it it'll say default was 7%, so the reviewer can see that they ran it with 50%. And also, like components, if I go in and say, my damageable components are the wall partitions and finishes, so I'm going to delete those. Oh, look, it'll flag that those are supposed to be there, but they're not.
This is James again. You mentioned if you use SP3, but to anyone's knowledge, is there another practical way to implement this?
No. I mean, I'm just trying to be careful about my multiple hats I'm wearing in this. I'm USRC member, but also SP3 developer. Frankly, that's why we are doing this project. Why Jack and Baker and I decided to do it is because there wasn't a way to do it, and we felt like P58 would be something useful for the profession. The alternative right now, is PACT, but PACT doesn't do the ready analysis. So I would say the only alternative in existence is ARUP has some in-house software that they run ready with. But no, there's no other publicly available alternative.
Well, I think
which is why we made it.
Fair to say, though, that we are aware, James, that Ashraf is possibly developing an add-on PACT to their software, and Bentley might be doing the same with their software. We're not aware that that's in fact going to happen, but there is a possibility that they will develop PACT type software as an add-on to their programs. Yeah.
So I've been discussing that with Ashraf over the last few weeks.
But anyway, in terms of the simplified procedure, I think this is just a tremendous step forward for us to begin the process. It's a great tool. So if there are none, I'm talking to Doug Hobart about the ASC 3141 seminar. This won't be quite as long or as detailed. There are a few issues that we need to address, but that should be just an hour-long type effort, and it will also require you just to go through the process with an example that you've done, just to be sure that you feel confident and familiar with the process. And then what we do want to do is we want the official launch to be on November 1st. already got inquiries from a client in Southern California who is looking for who is certified. So some of you would have received a notice from Evan regarding that question. And then we're going to be making a presentation at the LA Summit. So it's very exciting. So we're on our way.